The reason they don't want you to see this book, Nigeria and its criminal justice system, is because it will expose most of the ills that have been happening, and it hasn't even scratched the surface. It is terrible. It talks widely about the corrupt system of that country and why it's at a stagnant stage. So what you can do is make sure that you order for yourself a copy of that book and make sure that this man's voice is not silenced, because it's criminal to lock somebody up just because they're exercising their freedom, human rights to express themselves. He's been locked up for months now, and his health is at risk. His life is at risk. Please do whatever you can.
Farotimi identifies corruption as a significant impediment to justice in Nigeria. From the police to the judiciary, he outlines how bribery, favoritism, and political interference undermine the delivery of justice. He shares real-life cases to illustrate the systemic corruption that plagues the system. Key takeaway: corruption at every level of the criminal justice system erodes public trust and hinders justice. Chapter 4. The police, enforcers or oppressors? This chapter critiques the Nigerian police force, highlighting its inefficiency, lack of training, and susceptibility to corruption. Farotimi discusses the culture of brutality and extortion, emphasizing how the police often victimize the very citizens they are meant to protect. Key takeaway: a dysfunctional police force exacerbates the challenges within the criminal justice system. Chapter 5. The judiciary, a compromised arbiter. Farotimi examines the Nigerian judiciary, focusing on its independence, or lack thereof, inefficiencies, and susceptibility to external pressures. He discusses how judicial processes are often delayed or manipulated, leaving many without timely or fair resolutions. Key takeaway: judicial independence and efficiency are critical for a functioning justice system, yet both are lacking in Nigeria. Chapter 6. Prisons, punishment over rehabilitation. In this chapter, Farotimi explores Nigeria's prison system, describing it as overcrowded, underfunded, and punitive rather than rehabilitative. He highlights the plight of awaiting trial inmates, many of whom languish in prison for years without a court hearing. Key takeaway: Nigeria's prisons fail to rehabilitate offenders, perpetuating cycles of crime and injustice. Chapter 7. The plight of the marginalized. Farotimi discusses how the poor and marginalized suffer the most under the current system. He explains how wealth and influence can buy justice, while the less privileged are left to face the full brunt of the system's inadequacies. Key takeaway: the Nigerian justice system disproportionately targets and penalizes the poor. Chapter 8. Political interference and the elite's influence. This chapter highlights how political and elite interests undermine the criminal justice system. Farotimi provides examples of how politicians and influential individuals manipulate legal processes to evade accountability. Key takeaway: political interference compromises the integrity of Nigeria's criminal justice system. Chapter 9. Human rights violations. Farotimi addresses widespread human rights abuses in Nigeria, including unlawful arrests, extrajudicial killings, and police brutality. He critiques the lack of accountability for these violations and the culture of impunity that allows them to persist. Key takeaway: protecting human rights is fundamental, yet the Nigerian system consistently fails to do so. Chapter 10. Activism and the fight for justice. The chapter discusses the role of civil society, activists, and legal reformers in challenging the injustices within the system. Farotimi highlights the importance of grassroots movements and public awareness in driving change. Key takeaway: citizen activism and public accountability are critical to reforming the system. Chapter 11. The role of international influence. Farotimi examines how international organizations and foreign governments influence Nigeria's justice system. He critiques their limited understanding of local realities and their often superficial engagement with reform. Key takeaway: international interventions must align with local contexts to be effective. Chapter 12. Steps toward reform. This chapter provides actionable solutions for improving Nigeria's criminal justice system. Farotimi advocates for systemic reforms, including increased funding for the judiciary, police reform, prison decongestion, and better training for law enforcement. Key takeaway: comprehensive reform is necessary to address systemic issues and ensure justice. Chapter 13. A Vision for Justice. In the final chapter, Farotimi outlines his vision for a fair, efficient, and people-centered justice system. He emphasizes the need for leadership, accountability, and a collective commitment to change. Key takeaway: transforming Nigeria's criminal justice system requires collective effort and visionary leadership. Conclusion: Nigeria and its criminal justice system by Dele Farotimi.
Whatever you can to spread this video, to come up with whatever solutions that you can, right? The government, that justice is served and Dele Farotimi is released so that he can go and be with his family for this holiday or even in the new year. It is really unfair to lock somebody up, a citizen that is just expressing their opinions.